Hello and welcome to Devlog number 10. The first announcement that I want to make is that we finally created a Patreon for the team. I was kind of hesitant about doing that in the first place because I could go away for long periods of time, I could be at sea, I could be traveling, but now that the team has grown, I think that it's a little more reasonable to have one, and if I am gone for a long extended deployment, then we can always pause billing. So if you want to support the project, I'm going to put the link in the video description. I'm going to make an announcement about it in the Discord, so thank you in advance for your support. The work that's been done over the last couple weeks really fell into three categories, which were ships, weapons, and movement. In terms of the ships, we really want to get a bunch of extra classes into the game so that it's not just the frigate anymore. So I've got a Corvette model and a destroyer model that are currently done. The Corvette is currently being textured. The destroyer's model is done but needs to move on to texturing. I also did some concepting this week on what a light cruiser, a heavy cruiser, and a battleship are going to look like visually. I'd done a concept for what they will carry in terms of weapons and capabilities a couple months ago, but I hadn't gotten around to really figuring out what their look was going to be. The reason that I worked on that this week is because I'm going to be traveling for the next 50 days for work, and I'm going to be in quarantine for the first 2 weeks when I get there, so I'm going to be locked in a hotel room with really not much to do. So I figured while I have a drawing tablet, I'm going to take advantage of it, did a bunch of concepts that will hopefully keep me busy with modeling while I'm just locked in a room for 2 straight weeks with nothing else to do. I talked last time about wanting to get to implementing the systems that would make it so that when thrusters were damaged, it would affect the maneuverability of the ships. I didn't quite get to adding that in. Instead, I focused on user interface systems that would allow the player to control the movement of the ships more precisely, because in a game that's really heavily simulation based that is also a strategy game or a tactics game like this one, when your bullets are coming from certain angles or when your turret coverage is a certain way, you really need to be able to control the ships precisely so that you can bring the most weapons to bear on target or put your strong side towards the enemy. So to that end, I implemented a couple of the advanced movement commands that I'd planned on doing. So now we have movement and advanced movement on the action menu. And advanced movement is going to encompass a couple things. The first is heading. So if I'm traveling in this given direction right now, the ship is usually going to be looking along the direction that it's traveling. But if I want it to point towards those enemy ships over there because I know that my bow is stronger, I can give it this hold heading order. And so now the ship is going to turn and point in that direction that I told it to point in, regardless of the direction that it's actually traveling in. And so now once the ship has made the turn, we can see that as it is thrusting over in this direction, it's still pointed in the direction that I told it to point in. Now when it comes to turret coverage, I have 7 turrets on these 2 ships and a fire control radar up on top of one of them. But the issue is that these targets are above me, and it's going to take me a really long time to ascend to that height so that I can bring all my guns on the target. If I want to bring all my guns to bear on these targets, then I need to be able to control the roll of my ships so that I can make sure that all the mounts that I want are pointed in the right direction. So I added a roll command, and what this does is it changes what the ships consider their up direction, and so it will roll the entire formation as if I apply that order to the guide ship. And now this little box will show you that it's in a modified state. And so now I can use that roll to bring all of my guns into a way that can shoot at that target. And these movement commands can be combined, roll and heading, to change to give you complete control over the direction that the ship is facing or rolled, no matter which direction it's moving in. And I think that the addition of these 2 movement commands really adds to the tactical options that you have available to you in terms of how you want to deploy your fleet. You don't need to always be on the same level with your targets in order to be able to use all your guns against it now. And you also don't need to plan your movement so that you can keep a certain part of your ship pointed in a certain direction. You don't have to kind of cheese the movement commands anymore to do that. And finally, I significantly improved on the orbit command. So what this does is it allows us to orbit a specific point in space. And previously it really sucked because you just choose a point and it would orbit it always in a counterclockwise direction. Now you pick where you want it to orbit, and it gives you this widget which will show you the path your ship will orbit around. And you can even choose the direction depending on where it is relative or which side of your ship you have it on. So if I want to orbit clockwise around this point, I can issue that order, and my ship is now going to orbit that point at that distance in that direction. And it will also keep the roll of the ship so that it is pointed, or so that it is keeping the anchor of the orbit abeam of the ship, so that I can always keep all of my mounts pointed into the circle. I also made some changes to how the damage system works as kind of a precursor to implementing more powerful weapons, specifically railguns and beam weapons that'll be able to punch through targets. And so the original damage system didn't really support the things that were necessary to do that, and so I had to kind of take another look at how I was doing the damage. So now when I shoot my test railgun bullet at this, you can actually see it punch all the way through, because when the armor has been saturated and there's nothing in its way to hit, it doesn't eat up all the damage that the bullet is capable of doing, and so the bullet will just punch out the other side. And it can actually go through multiple targets. If there's enough damage available in the weapon's damage pool, it will actually punch through multiple targets. It took me 2 tries to really figure out how I wanted to do this. The first time I was just checking if there was damage left in the damage pool. If so, come out the other side. It'll be a cool looking effect. But then I realized, thinking about the larger ships that I was concepting, how I wanted to make it so that they wouldn't just dominate all the tiny ships, and there was no reason to have anything smaller than a battleship in your fleet because it would just get wrecked. And I realized that an over-penetration would be a way to make it so that smaller ships actually stood a fighting chance against larger ships. Now, what I mean by that is that I've changed the way the bullets work to have now a over-penetration distance, and if the distance between the entry point and the exit point on the other side is smaller than that distance, and the bullet has enough damage to punch through the armor on the other side, then it's going to be an over-penetration, and the bullet will only do a percentage of the damage that it would have done to internal components. And the reason that's a balancing system is because it'll make it so that larger ships with more powerful weapons will over-penetrate the target and only do a percentage of their weapons damage to that smaller ship, because it'll just pass right through without actually detonating inside. Meanwhile, when you're shooting at larger ships with these same weapons, where the hull is physically larger, where they have more armor damage resistance, so it won't necessarily punch through on the other side, it won't be able to do enough damage to the exit armor in order to go through, it'll always expend all of its damage inside the target. And this also paves the way for something that has been missing for a while, which is different bullet types, or just ammo for the gun type weapons in the first place. So right now all the guns have unlimited ammo, they're always shooting the same bullet. Having an HE versus an AP round, so armor piercing would be really good at dealing damage to armor, but it has a much higher risk of just going out the other side. And then you switch to HE, which doesn't have an over-penetration distance, would always blow up inside the target, would be better at dealing damage to targets that you've already basically eaten through the armor of. And finally, I added some more point defense systems. So the one that's on this ship, on the top and bottom, these are the flak point defenses. And so if I shoot a couple missiles at these, they'll fire these timed burst rounds, which will fly towards the target, try to estimate their lead time, and then explode in front of them or on top of them and take them with them. So that's a roughly 40-meter shrapnel explosion. And it's really good at taking out larger, more heavily armored missiles in large clusters. And then our other new point defense weapon is a Gatling gun. Just because it looks really cool, I figured it would make a really nice low-power option for ships that don't have large power plants that can't mount the laser point defenses. And I'll just show you what that one looks like. So not as effective as the laser, but still pretty effective when paired. They don't work too well on their own, though. Also, when the missile's coming transverse to it, they have a really hard time hitting it, obviously, because they have to lead and the target is changing course. So that takes a lot longer to take down, so not so great for area defense. Now, as I said, I'm going to be traveling for a little while. I'm going to be in quarantine for 2 weeks when I get there and 2 weeks when I get back to here, so I'm about to have even more free time than I've had recently to work on this. So I'm going to keep myself hopefully busy with getting some models for those larger ships, maybe hopefully getting 1 or 2 of them into the game by the time this is over. I think that having the larger ships will make things a lot more dynamic and interesting, rather than just everyone having 4 frigates in their fleet. It'll be a lot more exciting, a lot more room for various strategies. And to go along with these larger ships, I'd like to work on a couple of the larger weapons. Now that I've set the stage for the heavier weapons like railguns and beam weapons, I'm going to hopefully get to implementing at least one of those soon, maybe in the next couple weeks. And then, as I mentioned earlier, implementing magazines for the ballistic weapons so that you don't have unlimited ammo anymore, and so that you can choose the round that you want to be firing for a specific task. And that about wraps it up for this sprint. Thank you for watching.